Actually, I should have just resized those at the same time. 1 second. Delete that layer, I don't need it. Da, da, da. And you're welcome to use your own characters. I'm actually just going to copy these. Oh, apparently I didn't merge these two. Those are way big. Way big. Let's fix that. Let's take this one, we're gonna put him here. This one's gonna go here. This one's going to go here. And this one's going to go over here. And I don't need this part here. Cool. So we got that all set up. Let me save this. I have that layer on multiply, it's not gonna work. Happens if I throw it on normal. Nothing? Nothing. Perfect. And save this as a new file. Yay, Deus! Yeah. Name this directional lighting. I'm going to say if you want to break, now is a good time to take one. Because I'm going to see how much we can finish. Actually, I suppose that means I do not need this guy anymore. Haha. There we go. We can make this bigger. I'm going to need a new layer. And take 10, and then we'll be back, and then we'll power through how we're going to put directional lighting on complex objects is what it's going to boil down to. These are our complex objects that we've been drawing since last week. I also need my options. There we go. Oh, I'm going to have to change the size of this. Okay. Let me throw it at 600 DPI and see what that looks like. I can do it at low resolution, but I'm going to do it a little bit higher. There we go. That's a good size. Okay. Be right back. Take 10-minute break. Okay, I'm back a little bit earlier than expected, which gives me a little bit of time to pull up some kind of reference. So Google is a very good tool for finding just directional lighting references. So as you can see, I've got a couple different ones pulled up. And I'm going to be working relatively fast, um, just to kind of try to get the point across. I'm not in digital art we call it rendering, is when you make things neater and nicer as you go. I'm not gonna full on render this because it's just sketches. And did I make a new layer? Yes, and it is under my line art layer. Yes, I'm going to lock this so I can't mess around with it. So I try to treat areas of the face as their own individual shapes. Uh, so if it works for you to work from the tip of the nose because it's the highest point out, I like to picture my highest points. So if we've got our light coming in this way, I'm going to go in. Photoshop will let me. It's doing its thing again. I'm going to try to hammer this out in an hour or less. So I'm going to find my darkest points, which are going to be this side of the face because of cast shadow. His face is casting a shadow on itself. His brow is casting a shadow. His nose is casting a shadow. And then, like we had kind of been drawing with the sphere because the chin is spherical, I'm not going to go too much into face anatomy in this course, but we might have to revisit that one. That was a course I taught quite some time ago. Cheekbones. Deus has a bit of a jaw. His jaw and chin are casting a shadow on his neck. As you can see, I was using hash marks for my style just to kind of signify that. Generally, your upper lip is a little bit more in shadow than your lower lip when the light's coming from this angle. And then if I want to, I can kind of circle in on where my highlights are going to be. So it's going to pretty much touch the brown, come up. That is our high point on the brow portion of the face. Our high point on the eye portion of the face is kind of coming around here. On the nose, Deus has a little bit of a stronger nose, so it kind of comes down the bridge and then goes to this tip and a little bit here. And then it's going to be this cheekbone. He's going to have a high point. If I were to cut the face into the lower jaw, the high point would be right here and right here, and then lip and upper lip. So if it works better for you, work on each individual section by itself. Feel free to do that. And I'm gonna go in It's because it's the way I like to do things. Get my darker areas a little bit darker. And then if you want, you can work from where you had started making your high points. You can fade into that a little bit there. Then fade in from your dark areas. And again, I'm just kind of working quick. This is just a sketch. So I'm working from my biggest shapes to my smallest shapes. And it's a lot easier to darken up objects than it is to lighten up objects. It's just a side. Oh, and I'm accidentally lightening that. I don't want to do that. And then like we were doing the shapes on the face from our last class. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. I remember those zigzag lines, so I can put them in here. And then even though this plane is getting a lot of light because of the direction of the light, this is still the high point is kind of right against this line here. So we can darken the back if we want to. Just a hair. Back side of the nose. And technically there would be a little bit of where the nose stops casting a shadow. You'd see a little bit of that. And the same thing with the brow, uh, where this part here stops casting a shadow. And then remembering how we had done the nose from the last class, where that crease kind of fades. kind of casts a shadow. I'm just going to fade this line out a little bit more. Where'd my navigator go? There it is. Actually gonna bring his cheekbone up a little bit higher. This is where working light and fast kind of comes in handy, so then you can start seeing the entire thing going, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I need to lighten this up a hair. Okay, bring in the gum eraser. Like I see the cheekbone is a little bit too hard cut, just from looking here. So I'm gonna fade that out a little bit. And I'm gonna bring this lightness right down to the edge of my jawline here. Because I'm not hyper rendering it yet. And this is also where studies come in handy, so you can look at things and go, oh, okay, that's not how my study looked like doing really quick shading practices off of a reference image. Ooh. The next one, we're going to just hyper render one portion of the face, so you can kind of see what it looks like to go part by part. But this standard lighting, quote unquote, uh, we'll just do this one as a quick like gesture shading. Okay, this is a little bit dark skinned, but he's still got a little bit darker lips than the rest of his skin, so I'm kind of showing that just by making it darker and then the highlight a little bit more intense. And you can cast a shadow on the teeth. Will fade out from that chin. Oop. And then I can go back in and say, okay, there's his hair casts a shadow that follows the contours of his face. Might be a little bit dark, but that's okay. It's a sketch. Say his ear feathers cast a shadow on his neck. And then casts a little bit. It's got a little bit of a dark spot that kind of follows along it. And then if I were to draw out where the highlight would be for Adam's apple would be there. And there would be a little bit more highlight that kind of comes around. Casts a shadow on itself. In general, his neck is being shadowed by a huge portion of his face. And your eyelid does also cast a shadow on your eye. Not going to go too into ears and hair right now. But this outer part of the shell of the ears casting shadow on the feathers. Then this little lip, I can't remember what it's called. It's casting a bit of a shadow on the inside of the ear. So really quick and dirty, but it's starting to get there. We can even say the lip is casting shadow on the rest of the face from where our light's coming. So on this one, let's do the highest. I normally try to start with the highest point of the face, which is your nose is the sharpest, I should say, the sharpest point of the face. So this one stop doing the thing, Photoshop. Our light source is pretty much straight up top. So we could start it out the same way with our gestures of where the light is hitting it. So this time it's really, really focused on this plane here. It's really, really casting a shadow under here. So I'm just going to figure out my lightest points, which is kind of going to follow this curve here. It's going to hit the tip of the nose. I'm just going to kind of shade around it. So we can kind of see where I had put in the plane of the face. This is more in line with the reference image we were using. And then the shape of the face that I break down into is where I kind of stop where it meets the cheekbone and the upper lip, where you get that smile crease between your cheekbone. And then kind of once I got this filled out, I'm going to erase my my box that I had for blending it out. And then I'm going to slowly but surely add in my darks going that way. This one I don't want to reach too far because our high point is right here along the bridge of that nose. And it's just breaking down our shapes. So because I put that line in before I had started, before I decided we were going to be using this, I might go over it and erase it. I just work it in there. So skin is highly reflective or decently reflective. So you are going to get some bounce lighting. It's usually going to be down here. Remembering that a little bit of that nose study that we had done help us out. Because it's pretty hard. It's a straight kind of front down light. Nose is casting a little bit of a shadow. If you have the ability to put in highlights, uh, white chalk pencil or white gel pen can sometimes work if you're okay with hard highlights. I'm gonna make this plane just a little bit lighter. If you're working with pencil, you can make everywhere around it just a little bit darker by going over with a layer of hash lines. I'm fading it down from the top towards the bottom in the same direction as our little orb is faded. And when you put a highlight next to a shadow, it really brings out that shadow. So if it looks extreme in your reference image, you can put highlights next to it and that'll make it pop. Just a little bit of highlight. That's all it needs. And if I were bringing the corner of this lip, or I can't remember, me and anatomy, great friends, in case you can't tell. Um, I'd kind of bring that up into the nose from the numerous face studies I've done. Kind of connects up into the nostril, which I can see my line art's a little bit off, but that's okay. But treating each individual piece with its own highlights, its own lowlights. That's how you start really hyper rendering. Your shapes out. But if you pick a starting point, say the nose or the mouth, that can make your life a little bit easier if you don't want to do the route that I did, or you don't have the capabilities of going over your darks with lights. And we're gonna run a little bit low on time. It's okay. My headset is dying. Actually, you know what? I think that's my that's my voice getting a little bit rough because I was coughing from the uh, dust in the warehouse I work in. I'm trying. There we go, kind of. Reverb? Oh, that's strange. Hmm. Hmm. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna cut the stream and then I'm gonna see if that adjusts it. I'm also hmm. That is very strange. Does it work better this way? Let me adjust the volume of that. Okay, so we were on a top-down view, I think, from last time. The reason why I don't go so long between streams is I don't entirely remember where we were, so if you need to pipe up or if I get repetitive, let me know. So we were kind of going from one area and then working our way out, and we can kind of keep on with that since we've got a little bit more time now. And feel free to run your own music. There's not going to be so much teaching as we're just working through what we were going to do. Uh, so you can either go from smaller objects and work your way out. In this area, I was going from the highest point on the face, or the point that sticks out the most, which is typically your nose. Uh, but sometimes it's helpful to go with the flat planes of the face first, or the flat planes of your object. Oh, and I got a pinwheel. Come on, pinwheel. Get with the program, Photoshop. I did close down all my unneeded programs. Yeah. Oh, Photoshop's going to be a little bit on the slow side for a bit, for a couple minutes. Oh, Twitch didn't tell you I went live? That's unfortunate. So because it's pretty much just a straight down angle, this side of the face is going to be very similar shading and darkness, although I believe my line art has hash lines. Oh no, I don't. Never mind. I'm a liar. I did not put any sort of hash lines on that side. So I'm just going to kind of start pulling this a little bit this way. And then you'll see when we put lighter shades right beside a darker shade, that makes it look a little bit more like a hard line. And then if we kind of gradually move from one shade to another, that's where it's going to start looking more rounded. So finding which points are rounded of your shape. And which points are more flat are how you start getting good shading definition. Uh, just as a forethought, we are going when I eventually do the color basics class, which I believe is April or August. We are going to do a lot of grayscale stuff for anybody who shows up to that one. This is the only thing you're ever early for, Tiger? Oh no. So, and I've kind of stopped at this brow bone right here, because if I were to draw this in 3D, just shape it out really quick. This brow bone actually sticks out over top of this, and then this part kind of folds under. And then it starts smoothing out this way. So with our light coming from top down, the brow bone is going to cast a shadow over top of the eyelid. And you'll see, at least for me, I tend to jump around a lot. I'm going to try to avoid jumping around a little bit, just so you can kind of see where I'm going with what. So if I'm just doing this under eye portion, or this brow portion, this right here is where it kind of starts flattening out, and you can touch your own face and kind of feel it. See how big of a difference there is between this part with washed hands and this part. So we'd smooth our shading out. We'd have a little bit more gradation going in our shading versus this harder, darker area. And generally your eyebrow does sit right on the edge of the brow bone, typically. Might be a little bit underneath. Bold of me to assume you weren't poking at your face. Yeah. That's in one of my 3D courses we took eyeliner and drew lines on our faces through our wire frames. So if this part is sticking out about as far as this part, I can make them the same shade of gray, assuming my lighting source isn't too hard of a lighting. It's not like very close to his face. And you'll see I'm leaving a little bit of a lip here for his eyelid. And then there's usually a lower eyelid, so we can grab a lighter color. Let me just make this a little bit lighter. Or with your eraser, if you want, you can find the highest point if your light's coming from here. Will probably be somewhere around here. You can just lightly erase that out. Or if you're using charcoal, that's one of the reasons why pastels is good for this. Charcoal and pastels, actually, I've seen white charcoal. But because we don't want this looking super hard, and I can zoom out. Or hey, let's just put my navigator up here. That'll work. Since I don't think I'm going to be messing around with my brush too much. So this is one of the reasons why I generally will have my navigator open. So that way I can look over here and see if I'm making my shading too harsh. To make it look like a rounded object as opposed to a flat object. And Deus himself typically has some pretty mean circles starting to go on. But because this is a little bit 3/4, I'm not going to go too much into face anatomy. But instead of just drawing a circle under the eye, it's kind of coming along and dropping more over here. But then if we think of the eyelid as its own separate thing, grab my highlight. Sometimes it helps just to pretend each individual parts of the face or part of your complex object is its own thing and then attach it as you go. And I can't remember if I've used the term before, but this is what we call rendering. When you get more into the detail aspect, if I want to take this, my line art color, I can bleed that up too. Or if you're using pencils, you can redraw your line, then fade it up. So when we were talking about our hard down angle and how this brow is the sharpest point, when we were doing our squares, and we were shading the edges of our square. So this edge was say the highest point. It would be more white or more light. It would catch the most light, and then it would fade out. This eyebrow is going to be the same thing. And if you don't have the ability of using white, you can shade in from Under the hair is a good spot. And bring it in. Do the same thing on the other side. And just slowly work your way in. Since I'm using a gray background, I'm going to use a little bit of white. Just a little bit to differentiate the forehead from where it's going into the rest of it. And Deus's hair pops up a little bit, so it's if the light's coming from straight up, it is going to cast a shadow. And then the closer it is to the skin is where it'll make a harder shadow line. And then the farther away from the skin it is where your shadows would fade out. And I might challenge myself and see if we can. Oh, the next one would be super hard with hatching. Haha, but we might do it anyway. Oh, that's not the right. It's going to go in with dark. So there's this little edge that goes right underneath your lip, the muscle that pulls your lip side to side, and it's one of those things you can touch your face and then make expressions and see what pulls on where. I'm going to erase a little bit of this. Back in with a little bit more darks. You want, you can uh, highlight your edge, the edge of your bottom lip, because that would catch the most light. And then fade it in. And typically one of the reasons why I draw uh, hatch marks on my upper lip is because your upper lip is more in shadow than your lower lip, but you can also, without shading teeth, because they will always look like chiclets if you're not careful. But you can show where the lip is casting the shadow on the teeth, and there is a little bit of a shadow from the bottom lip. Not too much. I'm going to turn my image just because it's easier for me to turn my image. We can bring your chin and your jaw is going to cast the most amount of shadow, but right where your jaw starts connecting to your neck up here, unless you've got a wider jaw, is where it's going to start fading out and matching because it's not casting as much of a shadow on itself. We probably won't go too far down on this one, because I think we're going to have to go a little bit farther down on these two from where I've got the lighting set up. And because the light's from up top, the bottom of the face is just going to be ever so slightly darker. Might not even be too noticeable. Some of this and smooth it out a little bit better. That's where I'm trying to not use the undo tool very much. If we want, we can even take some of this lighter color. His chin and his jaw is a little bit stronger, but so it would catch a little bit of its own light there. But it would fade out because it is a rounded object. Yeah. And because I am so used to digital, I do that medium to dark to light thing quite a bit. Then right where this upper lip, the highest ledge is, just like the brow, that's where I'm going to put my whitest mark, and then it's going to start fading. Or my lightest mark, I should say. There's kind of the basics of our top down, very similar to our top and slightly off to the side. I might go back and render that out a little bit more. So this one's going to be a little bit more difficult because we have our light coming from way down here. And if I think of his face in, if I break down his face in the biggest shapes, I would imagine this part is going to be the part that's in darkest, and then this part's going to be the part that's in lightest. So we can work from the largest parts. This is probably going to look a little bit strange for a bit. And then this is where his face would start to get a little bit lighter. So I'd start to light up my shading because I kind of want that gradient to show. And then with that down light, the opposite of what we were doing with or down to up light, opposite of what we were doing from that top down light. So this part is going to be the part catching the most light. It's going to be casting a shadow on itself. So we're thinking less about a face and more about our shapes. And then instead this upper lip is going to be the part that catches the most light. And then it's going to cast a shadow upwards. Now here's the fun bit. So the bottom of our nose is going to be the part that catches the most light. I'm just working from my biggest shapes down to my smallest shapes. If you want, you can also cast the bottom lid shadow on the eye instead of going what most people would normally do with the top lid shadow on the eye. Then the chin is going to also cast a shadow on itself, or be the dark side of this round shape. Just a little bit of that there. I'm bringing just a little bit of that darkness into the upper lip for when we were talking about ambient inclusion. So at the corners, the lips are closer together. So the light's not going to be able to reach in there as much. Just a little bit extra shadow. The eye is just going to kind of lightly, because it is round, is just going to kind of cast a little bit of a shadow that way. Race a little bit here, because that's going to be our highest point. So thinking like we were before, this part is a little bit more rounded, so the shading's going to be a lot smoother. And if you want, you can erase a little bit of that bottom lip and then fade it in there, that bottom eyelid. It's catching the light. And then this part here, the jowls, it does kind of stick out a little bit usually. So I'm just going to kind of smooth that in there. Make this a little bit darker. As I go down, I'm using a little bit of a bigger brush for this. My lashes are casting a little bit of a shadow, so I just kind of hinted that there. Then right here is where it kind of starts flattening out, smoothing out like this does. So I can smooth my shading out. We can even, because the eyebrow would fade right about, start fading right about there. So again, the shading would kind of start smoothing out right about there. Now, if we pretended his nose, the bridge of his nose was just flat on top, would be right about there. So that would be our point that is highest in shadow, and then this is where it would start curving down. And it turns into a really flat plane right here. So you'd get a lot more of a distinct variation. We can smooth it out just a little bit to kind of round it out. Then right here is where it's flat. And then it quickly curves out into the cheekbone, depending on some people's faces. In this case, that is what I am doing. So I'm going to smooth out our shading where it's a little bit not as sharp of a curve. And I make the shading more harsh where it is really hard turn. If I were to bring lighter colors into that, I would actually say that he'd get this little triangle of light probably right about there somewhere. Now, if we think of these as when we were breaking down our shapes, these are a circle, or they kind of looked like circles. The nose is going to be casting a lot of this triangle shadow type on itself. I can smooth that out a little bit more. Probably won't be casting that much light, so I'll just smooth her out. Yes, shell shapes. All the shapes. And if we think this right under here is casting, I need black. Give me black. There we go. We can bring that up on this side of the face too. Realistically, depending on how bright that light is, Eyes would be a little bit more in shadow. And then I'm just very lightly darkening it up or darkening this up by just barely touching pencil strokes. You can use the side of your pencil and just you do it very, very lightly. You can get that same effect. Takes a little bit of practice. Then you can smudge it in if you'd like. So I'm gonna bring a little bit of this down just a hair. And then this part here would actually be, I'm going to erase a little bit of my line art. Actually be the part that's in the most light. And then this is just going to get a little bit in our way because he's wearing a scarf. So if you want, you can say the scarf is casting a shadow to about there. And then think of his neck like a cylinder. It's going to be a little bit darker up here until it catches that lip. But it's going to be a very gradual. Oh, that's not very gradual. And then it's just like with the hair's cast shadow, the closer it is to the skin, so probably right about there. I'm gonna erase some of this. The harder of a line it's going to leave, and then the farther away from the skin, so over here, is where our shadows are going to start smoothing out. And I'm just going to erase part on his Adam's apple here. This tendon is going to cast just a little bit of a shadow. Just a bit. Shading back down to smooth it out. And I can kind of Let's work the darks in. So like this part up here, it's not going to be this blinding. Well, there might be a spot on it that's a little bit lighter. I'll say probably there. Then right where the upper or the lower lip catches it. I can erase a line. See that this line was a little bit too dark, just or too broad, just from looking at my navigator. Taking a moment and leaning back. Uh-oh. Spinny wheel of doom. And this part under here would actually be a little bit lighter because it's catching more light than uh, this part of the chin. It's just breaking things down to shapes. We got some pretty good downlighting going on. Definitely looks like there's lighting coming from the bottom. This one's the fun one. So this one, he's probably got a candle or something right here. So a lot of the shading that we were using up here is going to be very, very dark. There's going to be lots of things that are in dark shadow. And if you want, you can work your way from a lighter gray to a darker gray. Work your way up to it. I'm just kind of going to jump in there. So if it's that close, there might be some light catching along the edge of his jaw. I'm going to bring the shadows right up to the corner of his eye. Because that's where things start turning around the side of your face. And if you think of your face like a box, if you pretended to flatten it out, right about there is where it would. And I'm actually just going to erase a little bit on his hair, because we might use that. bonuses of digital. Just erasing the very edge line, so that way I kind of see where it is. And it's a little bit down. But in a little bit more of a triangle. Now, if like up here we were thinking um, where that cast shadow or where that eyebrow was casting a shadow, or even where I'd drawn it up here, our light is a little bit down, but not too bad. So things are casting really dark shadows. And his highest point is again probably going to be his nose. If you'd like to work from the highest point out, feel free. I'm just leaving a little bit closer to his eyes there, because those are going to be the highest points around his eye. So I'm thinking like this sphere, where is that light gonna hit? Right about there. And then it is still around, but because it's so close, it's going to be a lot of really hard shadow and then working. This way. And then this is kind of like our downlight, where this was the part that was catching the most. We thought of our shapes. I'm trying to not go into my darks too much, or trying not to lighten them up too much. And the brows are just kind of casting a little bit of a shadow because that light is so close. And we're going to take a break in a couple minutes, and then we'll finish this one up. And if you guys would like, we can possibly do either the hair or the scarf on some of these. Talk about the shapes that are moving, or our oblong shapes. Then because my nose is my highest point, I'm kind of fading it in towards the nose. So I think we'll have time for it, and then I'm just going to split this into 2 videos. Is how this is going to work when I upload it. And then this bridge is kind of our highest point, so but it's rounded, so we're fading that off in either direction. Then that eyelid is casting a super hard shadow. It's also got that ambient lighting where lighting can't bounce around too hard in there. And we're going to have it kind of doing the same thing down here, where it's just coming in super hard, super bright. We're going to leave a little bit of a line just to kind of show ourselves where the edges of that are. And if we think of the neck again like a cylinder, the light's kind of coming in from that way. Like when we went over this and it's our halfway mark, we made everything back there black. Right about here's our halfway on a cylinder. But we're going to angle it just a little bit for the angle of that light. And then all of this is going to go in. I should make sure I'm actually using black. And then we can actually kind of follow the shape of the jaw for what shadow it's casting, because now the cast shadow is really hard. Then it gets kind of a little bit faded, not much faded, but a little bit. The Adam's apple is also going to cast its own shadow. And we've got a masked bandit going on. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break. And we'll be back in 10 minutes. Go have a walk around, get some water. Okay, I am back. Oh, haha, I made it its own layer. Look at me go. We're gonna bring this dark, kind of the following that line that we had done on the other one. We're imagining the face as planes. And this is about where it's going to get lighter. This part will still be fairly dark because of where the light's coming in. I'm just going to slowly add dark till I get it kind of to where I want it to be. Then we'll start bringing the shading down. So our highlight areas, those are going to be where it fades out the quickest, or where it's the lightest, and then it fades back. Oh, I've got a little bit of a ringing in my ears. That's weird. Oh, there it goes. Went away. And we could do the same thing on the neck, start bringing that dark out. And because I'm using such a big brush, it's a little bit harder to follow in the lines, so I'm just kind of erasing as I go. Just to kind of, so you guys can see the edges of the lines. You could probably go a little bit neater with a pencil if you'd like. Or not. I mean, we're going to be bringing a lot of curl this black down a lot, because this is going to look strange. I mean, regardless, without a background. Then we're remembering the places where two things are close together. Light's not catching on that as much unless it's pointed directly at that. But then you'd see at least a little bit of a darker line. This eyebrow is going to cast a shadow up. Then the ball of his nose is going to be our hardest point if we imagine it like it's a circle or like a sphere. Just going to kind of follow the bridge of that nose up a little bit. Start fading it out. And then because this particular lighting is so hard and harsh, we're actually going to try to leave as little of our original color as possible. And you can just keep rendering to your heart's desire. So for me, doing digital, if I was going to go too much farther than this, I'd probably start swapping over to my mixer brush. Oh, this isn't going to work. Okay, I have to put that back on. So that way I could start smudging out. That's way too hard. Let's lower that. Or your smudge stick for traditional. And you'll see I get these hard blacks, but that's because I've got a line art layer over top. And it's confusing my digital program because I'm telling it to sample from all of my layers. And I try to smudge it from dark going into light. And if you're using a smudge stick, if you go in between your tones, just use light circles. That can sometimes give you the tone you're trying to achieve. I feel like my flow is still a little bit too high. But if you don't get your bases down, you can only do so much, or you're going to be doing a lot of work with that smudge stick. Ooh. Now I want to bring the darker in. Start bleeding them together. You can keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it until you're happy with it. Or until you've decided you've had enough practice. I'm going to make it a little bit more obvious that his eyes are spherical. And then if I knew that the lighting was super hard coming right at him, I'd probably do background, or at least some of it, so that way it's not looking as harsh on the eyes. Then just kind of like that one, just gonna grab which this is a little bit harder to do in such a big space with a pencil, but doable. I see my black isn't actually as black as I think it is. I've done a large portion of it. So we've got our big shapes kind of worked out. Things are starting to move. Any questions so far? So for hair, where's my green? There it is. Is that what I was using over here? Probably. We can think of hair kind of like square paper or the edge of a box. Except in this case, this box, that box. Let me draw a better box. Should probably draw this on a different layer. So if you have a box that you're looking at straight on, you can't really see the edges. But if you turn it to the side, we could put it in perspective a little bit. We were to split the box in different shapes. That's kind of what we're looking at for hair. So instead of being straight, this little bit of hair is just a slightly curved plane. If we were to think of the back of the head, or of it coming around, breaking it down to its biggest shapes, that makes sense. So we're just going to pretend our hair is not hair. And we're going to find our shapes within our hair. I can find my right layer. There we go. So our lighting is from this slightly up angle. So we could pretend that the highlight is right there, like it is on our sphere. Probably a little bit more up. We'll go like that. And then it starts curving down to dark here, where it starts straightening out more like a cylinder. So ignoring our cast shadows, and then because it's a braid, we can pretend it's a cylinder. So then it's going to start slowly getting darker the farther we get from our light source. And then it's going to turn to this sphere. So it's going to start gradually getting lighter. I'm just going to erase that hard line a little bit. And then if we're pretending it's getting, the back of the head is round, we'd start getting, well, exactly like this sphere, it would start getting darker. Now, I don't draw every strand of Deus's hair, but I do generally put a idea as to where it's going. So like you can see this part's spiking up. So this is kind of like our square, except now it's going to have a triangle that's coming back down. So this is our high edge right here. And then it goes, can't see some stuff, but you can kind of see a little bit underneath. So we can shade out where the cast shadow would be. Here's casting shadow on itself. And the same thing back here, it's kind of casting a little bit of shadow in there. He's got the same idea going on this side. The light's hitting it up here. Then it's going to get darker on this back plane. And with hair, if you shade in the direction that the hair is going, you'll find it looks a little bit more realistic. And then we're just going to start breaking it down into its smaller shapes. And so we'll pretend the face is casting a shadow on the hair. Because it would be, a little bit. So now we can go back here and we could start to find our slightly smaller shapes. We could say the ear is casting a shadow. And then now instead, this part here is becoming its own cylinder. Light's hitting the top of our oblong cylinder up here. It's kind of coming down. Breaking off into other cylinders. You can put some darker shadows where it looks like it might be casting. This cylinder is casting shadow on the rest of it. Looks like we might have a cast. This bunch is casting a shadow on this bunch. And then now we're taking our we're taking our cylinder shape, and instead of it being square, or instead of it being straight, it's now getting a taper and it's twisting. Then this one is also a cylinder shape, so pretend you can't see that part, or that circle. and the cylinder shape is just continuously turning and turning and turning. That's how we're getting our braid. I can even leave that on there for a little bit. So our cylinder shape, I want it darker. Oh, that's because I'm on the wrong layer. So our light is hitting it from here, so it's going to get darker as it goes down. Trying not to touch the green. I think I touched the green. Eh. Then same thing here. Light's hitting this part of the cylinder first, and then it's fading darker. I'm going to get rid of the green. Hey, I think that's my first wrong layer of tonight. No bingo. And then this part of the hair is casting a shadow, a little bit of a shadow. I'm going to have to fake some stuff because I didn't necessarily draw this as a... I don't think it's the second shell. I didn't necessarily draw this as a very correct braid. Here's casting a little bit of a shadow. And then when you're rendering it, you can pick certain parts if you'd like, and you can highlight a little bit in it. And that just adds a little bit of realism. Some strands are sitting up higher than others, even if you don't draw them in. So you can just kind of fake them in there. We can do the same thing that we've been doing with all the other ones over here. We can fade out that shadow to where it flips over. And it gets a little bit harder the closer it is to the face. Harder shadow. Might be catching light past his chin because it might actually be in front of it. Again, I didn't exactly draw this with rendering in mind, but you can make do as you go. We can actually bring some of that neutral color little base tone back down into the braids, because that's going to be the highest point in the section, in each section. And if I were rendering, I would probably take a few strands and move them completely out of place over top of my line art and everything. This is just how I do it. So I find it looks more realistic when you get a few highlight lines, which if you've got a white pencil crayon, works great for that. Let me actually grab a lighter color from over here. So you can just pencil stroke a few in. These are just your stray hairs that are catching light compared to everything else. Throw in a couple darker ones, because hair is not all the same color. Got a little bit wild with that one. So does that answer your question on hair there, lady? Or kind of answer your question on hair? Hair shapes. Don't think of it like hair, think of it like a shape. Perfect. Because that was about all I had to go over. Threw you off, but shapes, yes. Actually, I can leave that. There's the hair cylinders. Yes, this one looks funny without having any shading anywhere else. And I can't remember if I gave the final homework, but um, the final homework is to find a reference image and see if you can figure out where the light or lighting, because there might be two, from like a model photo. Find a reference and see if you can find where the lighting is coming from. Oh, you already did that. Can't remember, did I sign that or not? But that is the final homework for this one. And next course in August is Color Basics. And there is going to be some shading in there. It will follow after this one quite closely. And if that's it, that's all. I hope you guys all have a good night.